Ladies and gentlemen, Paul Leslie presents. And now your host, Paul Leslie.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to welcome the great Joe Franklin. Joe Franklin is someone who has brought a lot of joy into the world. The Joe Franklin Show ran on television for 40 consecutive years, featuring guests in the hundreds of thousands. Joe Franklin has played himself in films like Manhattan, Ghostbusters, 29th Street, and Broadway Danny Rose. Joe Franklin has been honored by the Museum of Television and Radio and is still active today. In the words of Howard Stern, Joe Franklin is a celebrity you have to love. Mr. Franklin, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, what a nice eulogy. I mean, what a nice introduction. I really appreciate it. That's a very nice way of putting it. I did TV for 43 years. 43 years, believe it or not. That's a long time, right? And counting radio, I think I've been in this business now about 60 years. I'm only 39 years old. I would have been 40, but I was sick for 1 year. I'm sorry, I apologize, but I'm still going strong. Still doing interviews every day on Bloomberg Radio here in New York City. This week I got Cyndi Lauper, I got Neil Sedaka, I got Olivia Newton-John. I call my little segment the business of show business because I'm more or less the nostalgic historian in the world of show business, and I'm not going to quit until I get it right. So I'm just going to keep on practicing until I get it right, Paul.
Well, I think most stories are best from the beginning. What was life like growing up?
Well, I was in the Army when I was 17 and a half years old, and I had a little accident in the service, and then I began playing old records on the Army radio station in Temple, Texas. I was in Camp Hood, Texas, and word about me got written up in the Stars and Stripes and in New York papers like the New York Times and Daily News. And when I got out of the Army, they sent for me to take a job on the local radio station called WHOM. I had a program called Joe Franklin's Vaudeville Echoes, and I got paid zero. Then I got a phone call one day from WNEW, which was a major radio station back in those days. And they said, Joe, whatever you're making, we want you on our station. We'll double your salaries. And I was getting paid zero. So I had to think fast. I said, well, I'm making $20 a show. Joe will double us. I went to WNEW, and I met a man named Martin Block, who was the famous disc jockey on that radio station with his make-believe ballroom, and he gave me a job choosing his records. And from there, he got me my own radio show on WNEW, which I called the Record Collectors Exchange. I would go out to different stores and buy old records for a penny a piece, old Al Jolson's, old Eddie Cantor's, old Sophie Tucker's, old Fanny Price's, old Rudy Valley's. I'd come on there and say, ladies and gentlemen, here's a record worth $500. I'd make up those crazy stories. The next day, I go back to that same store, and I'd pick out 5 records. I put down 5 pennies on the counter, and I'd say, come here, kid. I said, what do you mean, kid? He says, I heard somebody on the radio last night saying these records worth $500 a piece. So I more or less created the collector's market, the blockbuster market of old records. That was the beginning of my true nostalgic career. I'm known more or less as the king of nostalgia. Not king of neuralgia, king of nostalgia. And one day I get a phone call from Channel 7, that's WABC TV. Then it was WJZ TV, and they said, Joe, we heard your voice on the radio, we like your voice, and we're just thinking about maybe lighting up in the daytime, but there was no daytime TV yet. TV was on the air only from 5 o'clock at night till sermonette. They said, Joe, if we gave you an hour a day in our proposed daytime schedule, what kind of a show might you do? I said, well, I do a show of people just talking, nose to nose, or eyeball to eyeball, something very pure, very organic from the bones. I said, Joe, you're out of your mind. You can't do a talk show on television. The word of television, you got to give them a vision. You got to give them salsa bottles, frat balls, baggy pants, got to burlesque kids. You can't just do it. There's no such thing as a talk show. I said, well, rock and roll Paul is just coming out. I do a show of kids dancing to records. I said, Joe, you're nuts. Who's going to watch kids on TV dance to records? Who's going to go Dick Clark becomes a billionaire? But I defied them. I did the first pure nose-to-nose TV talk show. My first guests included Kim Novak, Eddie Cantor, Georgie Jessel. I mean, I had tremendous. So that day, and I've got the film that A&E, or no, Hearst made a film called It's Only Talk, and it runs about 2 hours, and they showed that Joe Franklin invented the talk show. There was no talk show before that, so I can take a little bout. Every time you read a paper today, somebody's got their own talk show. They come and go today like flies, but I did create the talk show, for better or worse, and I'm still carrying on. And in fact, what I'm doing now is on 11:30 a.m. It's Bloomberg Radio, the same station, same kilocycles as I started on WNEW 11:30 a.m. 60 years ago. So life goes full cycle, you know what I'm saying? It's back where I began, but I'm still enjoying it. And I do lectures at colleges and nursing homes, and I do nostalgia memories. I was in the nursing home 2 weeks ago, and I see give a little lecture in the nursing home. I see a man in the front row falling asleep. I says to his wife, "Hey, what's that all about?" She says, "My husband is sleeping." I says, "Well, do me a favor, wake him up." She said, "No, you wake him up. You put him to sleep." They got good sense of humor with those old timers. Still carry. I've written 23 books. I've got whatever you want to tell me. What you want to ask me, Paul, I appreciate it. But I'm very happy to be on your show. I've been a fan of yours for a long time, and it's fun to be chatting with you.
Well, Mr. Franklin, you mentioned a moment ago the name Eddie Cantor.
Right.
And that's someone that maybe young people should find out about. He's an important person in American popular culture. Tell us about him.
You know what's sad? I'll tell you what, Eddie, in a second. Sad how people don't know. I met a lady the other day. She never heard of Joan Crawford. I heard myself. They never heard of Betty Davis. Never heard of Rudy Valley. The fame is very fleeting. They barely know Bing Crosby nowadays. Frank Sinatra's magic is waning. So it's very noble of you to want to keep those names alive a little bit on this radio show. Eddie Cantor was the #1 star in all of the world for many, many years. He was #1 on radio with the old Chase and Sanborn Hour every Sunday night at 8 o'clock. He was #1 in movies with movies like Roman Scandals and Strike Me Pink and so many. They would line up around the block, around the clock at Radio City Music Hall to see Eddie Cantor movies like Whoopi, Making Whoopi. And he was #1 in Royville at the Palace Theater. He holds the attendance record at the Palace Theater. He was on the bill with Georgie Jessel. He was #1 in phonograph record sales in the 1920s. So he was known as the apostle of pep. He was the energy that they needed in the early days of the Depression in the early 30s. He was very lively and bright and sparkling and jumping up and down. And there was a big movie on his life called The Eddie Cantor Story with Keith Brazell. It was not such a great movie though, but he filled an important part in show business history. He died in 1964 at the age of 72. In fact, I wrote his radio show when I was a kid. He gave me a job writing his radio show and providing him with the old records that I had saved up and little anecdotes about the stars. So we gave a little recognition. There's still old timers who remember him and love him, but the young generation today, it's all rock and roll and Puff Daddy and Lady Gaga and Madonna, and you can't knock what's current, right? You can't knock it. Trends do come and go. Trends change, but I've got a lot of memories of the old timers that I knew and loved when I was a kid. Veronica Lake and Rudy Valley and Kate Smith, who sang God Bless America. They were all dear friends of mine way back when.
One of the people in your book, and I'm talking about your book, Up Late with Joe Franklin.
Yes.
Just a fantastic, entertaining book that really could keep you up at night. I wanted to ask you about meeting the great Al Jolson. What was your first impression?
Well, he was known as the world's greatest entertainer. One night when I was a kid, I turned on the radio and I heard that voice. I said, "My God, what a voice!" I was maybe 10 years old. I just fell in love with that voice, and I met him several times. When they made the movie called The Jolson Story with Larry Parks, I was lucky enough to be made sort of technical advisor. I lent him some of my old records. I had dinner with Al Jolson a few times. He was, I mean, when he would do a Broadway, it was in many, many Broadway shows, and then about 10 minutes into the show, he would say to the audience, "Listen, should I send the cast home or just sing to you?" And they would scream, "Yes, yes." He would send the whole cast home and sing for about 2.5, 3 hours. He sang Sonny Boy and Rockabye Your Baby with a Dixie Melody and Swanee and all those great songs. He was beyond dynamic, beyond tantalizing, beyond anything. He was just a great star. He died in 1950 at the age of only 64, but what he crowded into that lifetime, that was great track record was Al Jolson. There are Al Jolson conventions all over the world today where people line up by the thousands to come and remember him and honor him and watch his old movies and play his old records. So it's a bygone era, Paul, but it's nice to be remembered, and I hope that many of people that are listening now remember Jolson, remember Cantor, and remember what fun it was back in those days.
There's another name that I wanted to get your impression when you met George M. Cohan.
I met him in the park on a bench when I was a kid. I recognized him from having seen him in a Broadway show called I'd Rather Be Right. And I said, "Mr. Cohen, did you ever make any records?" So he gave me a record. He went next time. I met him at his house about a week later. He gave me a record, a one-sided record. There was no such thing. It was a 78 RPM, long before LPs, long before albums. A song called "You Won't Do Any Business If You Won't Do Any Business If You Haven't Got a Band. You won't do any business if you haven't got a band." And he had a record for me in white shoe polish. I said, "Mr. Cohen, how many records did you make?" He said he made about 6 or 7 back in the old days. So I set out to buy those records, and in searching for that, I found out that Jolson made thousands, Eddie Cantor made thousands, Kate Smith made thousands. So that was the beginning of my searching and making the rounds to collect old records. And that's how I became known as the king of nostalgia. And Cohan was my inspiration. He was my mentor for everything I did in later years in this business. I remember him fondly. He wrote Yankee Doodle Dandy. I'm a Yankee Doodle Dandy. He wrote You're a Grand Old Flag. Originally, it was called Your Grand Old Rag. because that was the era of ragtime, but public didn't like that connotation of the word rag, so they changed it to You're a Grand Old Flag. And he wrote Mary's a Grand Old Name, and so many fabulous songs. George M. Cohan was one of Cohan, Cohan. He was best. I had Charlie Chaplin on my TV show, and I had Ronald Reagan 5 times. I had Richard Nixon. I had John Wayne. I had Cary Grant. I mentioned Frank Sinatra twice, Bing Crosby twice. I think I had them all. I tried for Greta Garbo. Greta Garbo was a dear friend of mine, but Greta Garbo would not go on any shows. She said, I want to be alone. But she was just, we've got great memories, Paul.
I wanted to ask you about Woody Allen. Woody Allen is just probably the greatest filmmaker, in my humble opinion, of American film.
I'm in several of Woody Allen movies. I'm in Broadway, Danny Rose. I'm in Manhattan. He's a very dear friend of mine, and I enjoy his work. I think he's a genius filmmaker, and I can only tell you that when he makes a movie, there's no script. He just tells you, you can see the flavor of the movie role, and it's just fantastic. The kind of a mind he's got is brilliant. I remember, you ever see Broadway, Danny Rose?
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
I'm in the pivotal scene, where the singer's trying to make his comeback, the old timer. And he's a very dear friend of mine. You can't knock it. He's a modern day Charlie Chaplin, I guess. You can't knock that,
What do you find him to be like personally?
Very quiet, very, very subdued, totally into it. I think he still goes to a psychiatrist, as so many people do. You want to know the meaning of life. He's the genius of the movie business, still is to this day. Movies are eagerly awaited, and they do pretty big business all over the world. So he's certainly got his niche.
Both on radio and on television, who has been your most talented guest?
I would say Bing Crosby. That's the one who excited me. I always thought of Bing, Paul, was what you would call mechanically reproduced. I thought of Bing on radio, on TV, on records, in movies. But when you walked toward me, flesh and blood that day, I think I melted. I think I did my best interview that day. Out of 500,000 interviews, I think I did my best one with Bing. He was my favorite. And the ironic thing, he was not that romantic. It's kind of ironic that the number one singer in the world of romantic ballads was not that romantic. He would tell his songwriters, he would say, don't put the word I love you twice in one song. I think he'd rather be out hunting or fishing with the boys. But Bing was his own man. His record of White Christmas is still the number one record seller of all time. And I just loved Bing Crosby. I had people that never made any appearances on TV, including Cary Grant, including John Wayne, who didn't ever do any interviews anyplace else. But Bing remains in my mind a highlight, if not the highlight.
Wow. Another one would be Frank Sinatra.
He was the best. What a voice. There'll be another Sinatra. I asked him one time, I said, Frank, how could you have been under contract at one time to 3 people you were under contract? I remember Tommy Dorsey, the famous band leader, Harry James, the famous band leader, and your press agent, George Evans. He said, Joe, let me tell you one thing. He said, hearts and contracts were meant to be broken. It's not tender. Hearts and contracts were meant to be broken. I never forget it. He spoke a little bit like a kid from the East Side, but when he sang, just thrills. Nobody ever had that voice. He would make every song into a story with a middle, with a beginning, with an ending. He was just beyond captivating. Memory will endure.
One artist who still records, still tours, who got some early exposure on the Joe Franklin Show would be Barry Manilow, and he's a singer who has paid a lot of homage to the old-time greats and the Tin Pan Alley, the American songbook, as you would say. Tell us about Manilow.
He's a legend. He certainly is a music legend, along with Billy Joel and so many more. One of my backup singers for Barry Manilow was Madonna. I knew she was going to make good. She said to the other singers, back up, back up, back up. I knew her. She was very depressing. She knew how to merchandise her own career. But Barbra Streisand had been my singer for 1 year before she was maybe 17 years old. She was my house singer. She was followed by Connie Francis. Connie was followed by Eddie Fisher. I had Patti Page when she was very young. Remember Patti Page, the singing rage? Remember that name, Patti Page? I had them all as in those days, I had a big orchestra, a 15-piece, 18-piece orchestra to play for these singers, and it was a great era of live TV. I would have all my commercials on one time I had 28 commercials on my desk, 28 commercials, which I did live, 28. Martin Payne, Bertolli Olive Oil, Nabisco Shredded Wheat, Imperial Margarine, all on my desk was a cluttered desk. Almost as cluttered as my office is nowadays. My office is quite well known for being such a mess, but I'm enjoying it. I'm still in demand for radio or TV. They want me to go back on TV, which I never will. So I don't want to get into that much rehearsal anymore, but it was a golden era. I was there when TV was brand new, and I grew up with it, and I became part of it. I was very close with Johnny Carson. I was on his show a couple times. He was on my show a couple times. And they're all gone, all the other talk shows, except for Dick Cavett. I think Dick Cavett and I were the last two. Johnny Carson, Merv Griffin, Mike Douglas, Jack Paar, they're all gone. I got great sacred memories of those people. I loved them. But I'm still hanging on.
Now, you mentioned Barbra Streisand a moment ago. What was your impression of her when you met her?
I knew she'd make good. One time she was on my panel with Rudy Valley. Rudy Valley says, "You'll never make it, Barbara. You don't have the right face, you don't have the right nose." And that sort of gave her even more of a reason to accept that challenge and make good. She got a part in a Broadway show written by Harold Rome, who discovered her on my show. Harold Rome, the famous songwriter. And that Broadway show was called "I Could Get It For You Wholesale." She sang a song called Miss Marmalstein. And, of course, after that, she became the star of a big Broadway show called Funny Girl, where she portrayed the late comedian Fanny Bryce. She certainly took off, and you can't knock her. She made $3 million a month ago singing at a banker's convention. $3 million for one performance. I always say I got to work 2 weeks for that kind of money.
You were mentioning the other talk show hosts, and
right.
One of them that's based out of New York City, who, as you like to say, he's made good. Tell us about David Letterman. David Letterman has had you.
Oh, you can't knock what pays the rent. He's gigantic. As a Jay Leno, I used to get Jay Leno little jobs in here and there in nightclubs to get him rolling. He still calls me and says hello to me. And David Letterman, of course, he's the one and only. He's beyond the broadcast legend. He's about 65, 67, 68 years old now, but you got to give him credit. He comes on every night. He's so spontaneous and so clever and humorous and throws his pencil into the audience and so forth. Can't knock it. He's beyond a legend. As is Jay Leno, you can't knock it now. They got these new ones coming up like Jimmy Fallon and all these others. They're lucky to be in this field, but they've got a certain likability factor that the public seems to enjoy.
What does New York mean to you?
Well, I'm kind of known as Broadway Joe. I've been in this vicinity for about 50, 60 years now. And some people think it's going downhill, but I think under the tutelage of Mayor Bloomberg, it's gone uphill. And we've got a new mayor soon. Mr. de Blasio is also a dear friend of mine. So I think education is up, graduations are up, tourism is way up. Filmmaking in the city here is now maybe bigger than what it is in California. New York, to me, is the pivotal part of the whole country. It's the museums with the stock market. I love New York. I love the fiber, the ambiance, the track record. It's here to stay. It's definitely here to stay.
What is the best thing about being Joe Franklin?
Well, I think the best thing is that, I mean, in all modesty, I'm very recognized, even though I've been on TV now for so many years. Every place I go, Joe, we love you, we miss you, we learned so much from you. We learned culture, we learned Americana, we learned about movies, about old-time radio. I would take on any topic, and, I had a fantastic run on the Guinness Book of World Records somewhere for the world's longest-running TV talk show. I never had a talent coordinator. I was always my own. I could feel in my mind the chemistry. I could feel who'd go well on my panel. I had Ronald Reagan with the dancing dentist. I would have Margaret Mead, the man who whistled through his nose. I could feel who'd go well together. I had a very well-known mix. I would sometimes have 15 guests on one show. I don't know how I got them in there, but I would pack them in there some days. I mean, if I had a Bill Cosby or somebody like that, I would give them the whole hour naturally. But I've got maybe out of my 28,000 shows, I got maybe about 500 on video, which I saved. And the rest are gone into space. They would tape one show over the last show. That's how they saved a lot of money back in those days, which is kind of sad. I wish I had more shows today. Sorry, more than 500, but that's the way the cookie crumbles.
This is a question I used to ask people, but I'm very curious to know, what is your all-time favorite meal?
I would say meatballs and spaghetti. Believe it or not, I'm very simple. And I love lamb chops and meatballs and spaghetti, and I guess I like a little Jell-O at the end. I'm like Duke Ellington. Sometimes I like to have my dessert at the beginning, because if later on I want to room for the end of the meal, so I have my dessert first, my cheesecake, whatever, before I start the meal. But I try to cut down, it's the calories mounted. I think the best probably is just have half the plate, and then whatever is left, push the plate away with the second half,
For anyone who listens to this broadcast, wherever they are in the world, what do you want to say to the people who are listening in?
I just want to say thank you for your loyalty, for your response. I mean, one of my deep regrets is that I never answered my fan mail. I got thousands and thousands of people almost hate me because they wrote in for autograph pictures, or they wanted to send me souvenirs. I just never got around to it. The days go so fast, but it's just, except for being a little guilty about that fact that I didn't answer my mail, and I got thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of letters which I never answered. I'm happy that I was able to teach people Americana, culture, show business, bro. I'm going to do the best I can for as long as they want me. I've got so many nibbles to do guest appearances, bring back the old Joe Franklin show, which I said I never would, but it's just an amazing career. I've written one book that's the Bible of the film industry. It's called Classics of the Silent Screen. It's a film history that's second to none, sold over 1 million books. And I've read Joe Franklin's awfully corny joke books, Joe Franklin's memory made cookbook, favorite recipes of some of the old big movie stars of the past, Clark Gable's onions, Jack Benny's meatballs. Oh, it's a great book, and I've got so many of them. I'm doing a book now called Growing Up with Radio. It'll be out soon about the old radio stars, and I got a trivia book with Square One Publishers called Joe Franklin's Trivia Game, which is a big seller all over the world. My last book, Paul, is now in its third printing. You want to know why?
What's that?
The first two printings were blurred. I'm only kidding, but I still enjoy knocking out these things, and do a lot of benefits. I do a lot of speeches at universities, and the college kids love when I do a question and answer bit and ask me about the old days and Gone with the Wind and Lucille Ball and Lassie and Lost in Space. I chose the right profession, I think, you know?
Yeah, I would definitely have to agree with you. For my last question.
Okay.
Who is Joe Franklin?
Well, he's a certain guy that I'd like to get to meet someday. He's very shy, very modest guy. He doesn't blow his horn too much. I never made the circus with the big-time parties. Never had an agent. If I had an agent or a manager, and I had somebody who wanted to work with me, I felt intimidated. I just did it all by myself. And you can't knock it. It worked. I could have been even bigger and been a multi-millionaire, but I've got my niche, and I'm Joe Franklin who's just never went to wild parties, never looked in the social register. I've always been invited all over the world, Italy, Israel, France, with the airline free, the hotel free. I just never took advantage. I just didn't want to be like a mooch. I never took anything for nothing. Always paid my way any place I went, and it's been a great career, and I meet nice people like you, Paul, so it pays off at the end, you know?
Wow. Well, Mr. Franklin, I can say there is only one Joe Franklin. You brought a lot of joy.
And one is enough, Paul, and you got a good radio personality. I want to wish you much success. I got one or two people I'd like you to chat with eventually, so we'll be in touch, right?
Absolutely. I hope to have you again. Thank you so much.
Paul, you want to, when we hang up, would you call me back first 1 second?
Sure.
And God bless you. It's been my pleasure. I'll be here. Give me one more call, Paul. Thanks.